All right, stop. Good. Good. That went rather better than I hoped. Very good. Thank you very much. Well done. All right, so we've got an exciting last day. We've got some keynote presentations. We've got some special sessions I'm about to introduce. There's a panel discussion, which looks fascinating. And then we have some closing remarks at the end from Rachel Lambert and some other things. And there's all sorts of prize giving today, and there's competitions. You're about to get an email very shortly, which will give you the links to do voting for both posters and presentations. So there's lots going on, an exciting last day. We need the energy to keep going. Right, so I'm going to start off with Dahlia Sparling, who's going to come and give an IMMANA special session. For the last 10 years, this community has been producing a series of methods and metrics to understand and to quantify the links between agriculture, nutrition, and health. And there's been a question, well, what methods have been produced? Where have we already got really good methods? Where do we need new methods? How do we identify what still needs to be done? And the answer is about to come be told. So I'm going to hand over to Dahlia Sparling, who has done a review of the methods and metrics. Thalia.
Okay, yes, thank you for coming this early. I know that at day 5 we all get a bit saturated, so it's nice to be here. My name is Dahlia Sparling, and I'm an IMMANA postdoctoral fellow, and for this project I work with Sunita Kadiala, who's the PI of the IMMANA program. And today I'm going to talk to you about an evidence and gap map of tools, metrics, and methods that have been used to understand the pathways between agriculture, nutrition, and health. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say that we know that agriculture, food systems, and nutrition pathways are very important in their contribution to both human and planetary health outcomes. And we also know that these pathways are complex and dynamic and very hard to measure. So in the wake of the 2007-2008 food price crisis, there was a renewed investment in developing methods and metrics to measure these complex pathways. And this led the way to various projects in various forms, including things like CHEFS and Index and the Global Dietary Database, A4NH, and of course our own project IMMANA. The other rationale for this project is to really summarize what we've done in the IMMANA program and plan our next step for the exciting IMMANA 2 phase. So we have 2 objectives. One is to identify the innovation in tools, metrics, and methods for research on food systems and agriculture and nutrition, specifically in the last 10 years, and map them onto conceptual frameworks. Our second objective is to highlight opportunities for future development, and this is both through addressing gaps that we identify and through taking these nascent developments into more widespread use. So I want to take a step back for any of you who were at the Learning Lab on systematic reviews. You might have heard this already, but an evidence and gap map is a type of evidence synthesis, and it shares aspects with both scoping and systematic reviews, and it can be exhaustive, but ours is designed to be comprehensive, and it's designed around a systematic search strategy. It most importantly highlights evidence that exists and that doesn't exist, and this can direct research priorities, policy making, and investments, and it's usually set against some kind of framework so that you're not just mapping what's out there, but also what's not. And the fun part of an EGM, or an evidence and gap map, is that it's an interactive framework that can be tabulated and filtered and played with by its user. And it can show both macro and micro levels of information. You can see a broad picture of what's out there, and you can also zoom in to each cell. It will not meta-analyze or provide effect estimates. It's not going to tell you what the evidence says. It's going to tell you what exists, what's out there. So I could spend a long time on our methods, but I'll try to keep it brief for this morning. We employed a very broad search strategy, but we worked quite hard to make it both specific and sensitive. We used 2 published literature databases, and we also conducted a gray literature search for key websites, projects, and grant databases, which is still in process. We limited the search to the last 10 years, so that would correspond to these new investments and keep the focus on innovation. We screened for reports on either agriculture and food systems or with nutrition and nutrition-related health. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about why it had to be either or rather than and. At the end, it was a methodological issue. And we screened for reports that used tools, metrics, or methods that were developed or newly applied since 2008. So anything that existed before but was kind of newly developed or applied in this space. We mapped reports across 12 thematic domains, which are the rows that you'll see in the map, against categories of tools, metrics, and methods, and there's some breakout with those in the columns. So I'm sure many of you are familiar. This might be even your work. I'll just point up here. These are some of the prevailing conceptual frameworks that have been used in this space. And as many of you know, when you try to flatten some of these very dynamic pathways with arrows going in every direction, it can be quite challenging. And one tendency is to disaggregate further and further and further down into the minutia of each domain. But for this project is very visual. So we worked very hard. We tested out lots of different strategies. And what we came up with were these 12 thematic domains. And they can be subdivided, of course, further, but for visualization. Reports can also be mapped on more than one of these, but we tried to limit it to no more than 3. So here are this is without some of the gray literature, with some of it, but from this I'm presenting mainly the results from the published literature database today. And we found that there were about 24,000 search hits, and we screened 19,000 of them after removing duplicates based on their titles and abstracts. We were left with about 1,000 studies that we reported on using the full text and excluded another almost 400 of them. And then we ended up including and mapping 634 reports. And these reports, they don't represent individual, they use tools, metrics, and methods, but many of them use the same tools, metrics, and methods. So this is any grouping of tool and metric that has been applied. So from the map, it's a bit tricky to see some of these overarching trends and statistics, so I'm just going to take a few minutes and explain some of the summary things that we found by doing this project. So we divided on tools, metrics, and methods, but these were actually broken out. Metrics we left as a group, we didn't subdivide it, but on methods, for instance, we found that most reports used analysis and models, and very few focused on research design. We broke tools out into technology measures and applications, and then survey instruments and research tools. And the majority were around technology, but some of them did develop new questionnaires and new types of research tools, and that was broken out into quantitative and qualitative, which is not shown here. These bars down at the bottom are a further breakout of the coding we used for the technology domain. So you can see we also have specific categories for things like gene sequencing or biochemical tests or geospatial applications. So this is the same list of domains I showed previously. You can see that they're certainly not very equal across domains. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these trends later, but one thing I'll point out, for instance, is that you see quite a lot on primary food production, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and then ecology, sustainability, and environment. And this is partly because there was a huge push in measuring water as it relates to the food system, and these were coded on all three of those. So I don't expect you to be able to read all of these different little labels. Maybe you can. But this is to say that this was my iterative process of grouping what I found. This is not against a conceptual framework, but these pies are broadly designed to help users filter by what they might want to see. So there's very granular stuff on here, such as like microbiome or emergy assessment or biofortification. And these groups, these big groups, actually, many of them have further subdivisions. So for instance, on, that moved. On water and diets are a particularly big group. This is sort of the breakout of the subcategories within that. And you can look at hydrological models, you can look at gray water footprints, or you can look at household water insecurity metrics. And even these are broken out further by sometimes individual tools, metrics, and methods. So if you want to, this diets chart has somehow slipped magically behind water, but this, if you want to search for any tool using the food insecurity experience scale, which is a new metric since 2008, you can filter on that. So you can also see that there's certainly not parity in where these tools were developed or applied in the last 10 years. We do see that there's a dominance in Europe and in Asia, which is mostly China, and then North America. But there are a fair few that have been used in lower and middle income settings. We also based on other evidence and gap maps run by the Campbell collaboration, and also our own interests in this space, we decided to assign sort of these non-ordinal filters for things like climate change or equity. And we included things like private sector engagement. You can see there's almost nothing there. And that, I'll explain more about that later. And you can filter on the map, the user can select or deselect any of these to show what they'd like to see. So now the fun part. I just have to, my hyperlinks they're not working, so just going to have to open the map in a different place. Okay, ready? So, still waiting. Sorry. Should have just shown you my desktop. System preferences? I don't. Can't you just put my desktop on? Yes. Can you just put the desktop on? Desktop. I'm trying. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Just do it this way. So this is the map. Now, when you have a nice big screen, you can see the full thing. forgive me, I'm going to zoom in and out a bit here. But this, so if you want to see the whole map, you can see it by zooming out. But just to illustrate, I'm going to zoom in for you. And so you can see that these are the subcategories of tools and metrics and methods up on the columns. And on the left here, you see all of these 12 domains. Now, each cell has these bubbles in it, and the size of the bubble corresponds to the number of studies that are in that cell, and the color of the bubbles corresponds to this little key down here, which is stage of development. So in an evidence and gap map, with tools and metrics and methods, you can't necessarily do a quality assessment. So what we decided to do was kind of rank studies based on their stage of development, where stage one is concept and pilot development, which is the blue color, and then going all the way up to red, which is widespread adoption. So you'll see that when I roll over one of these cells, it will give me a little snapshot of the number of studies in each cell. And I can even go further, and I can click on each cell, and it will basically give me a bibliography of the studies within this. And they have a little color code, and you can see these different studies and their abstracts here. So then I'm going to show you just a few more functionality pieces of this map. This is a little info tab. It gives you some tips and tricks for how to use the map. And then the fun part is this little gray filters button up here in the left. Let's just hope this works. So you can, up here on the right, you can see there's different styles. So if I want to see a visualization with this mosaic style, I can change it. Let me zoom out for you. Oops, that's in. And you can see a different way of visualizing these data. So I'm going to go back to, you have several different options there. I won't go through them all, but I'll go back to the more traditional bubble map. And then if I want to say, for this project, we really wanted to identify the specific tools and metrics and methods that came out of the IMMANA project, I can also do that. I can filter just based on IMMANA, and I can see the different projects. And many of you will see your own work up here, and some of it which hasn't been published or I might not know about yet, I certainly will be adding to the map. So if I click, for instance, on this, I'll see, for instance, Will Masters and Anna's work on the IANDA project. So I can also, I'll just run through these filters very quickly for you. If I want to see only tools on, for instance, equity, I can filter by that. And I know that this big red bubble is the WEA because it's been very widely adopted. And I can look at the various studies and places where that was specifically applied if I open up that cell. So there's a lot of different filters on here. You can see that you can search on setting or geographic application in Africa and Europe, the Middle East, etc. You can search on measurement unit, and then this group of TMM is tools, metrics, and methods, and you can search on any of these different filters that I've shown you previously in the slides. So, for instance, on microbiome or on the water metrics. And this will allow you to tabulate yourself what you might want to see. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now and leave you with just a few sort of final thoughts. So we see from this type of project that there are very clear trends. We see that there's been a huge proliferation in dietary tools, metrics, and methods, especially with technology applications and different types of intake assessment. We see that water footprinting has really come an incredibly long way, in the last 10 years. Genetic sequencing for measuring things like the microbiome is quite advanced now, and I'm sure we'll go further. And then we see a lot of tools on ecology, climate change, and the environment. We also see very clear gaps. There's not a single tool on conflict of interest. We chose specifically not to put the private sector on here as a domain because of the complications around what that really means, but we have a filter for that as well. We see very few tools on markets or on food and agricultural policy or multi-sectoral partnerships. And I want to point out that gaps can mean a couple of different things in this map. It can mean that we have what we need, that prior to 2008, we had developed lots of great ways of measuring these complex pathways, and we should just invest in using more of these tools in effectiveness studies and other forms of research. It can also mean that we still don't have adequate tools, metrics, and methods. And the map is not going to tell you which gap is which, but it's certainly in your own field, in your own interest. I think it's fairly easy to discern maybe which is which, and we should maybe look further into this. So I will also just point to a few challenges in this type of project. So evidence and gap maps have been designed for effectiveness studies or reviews of those effectiveness studies. So we had to reinvent this methodology to describe metrics, methods, and tools. And we should maybe put our own map on the map eventually, because it really did take a lot of novel thinking to get this framework to fit what we wanted to represent. Making a search strategy for tools, metrics, and methods is challenging because you can't actually use the word methods, otherwise you'll identify 100% of the literature out there. So it took us a long time and lots of different trials to find a way to be both sensitive and specific and not include everything under the sun. And then defining what's really new, what's novel. You know, if a metric is developed in the last 10 years and it's brand new, that's easy. But when you take an older method and you apply it in a new space, what really constitutes innovation was a huge challenge for us. And we overcame these challenges in various ways, one through working through our advisory group and through consensus in our author group. Methods are particularly hard to define in terms of innovation and categorization. If you have an algorithm and you add one piece to it, is that a new innovation? We also were challenged to figure out where the parameters, where the limits of the agriculture nutrition pathway are. For instance, you might say, why is a water footprint assessment on this map? Well, most water footprint assessments measure crops. They measure virtual water trade between cities, between regions, between countries. And this is it's an essential underpinning to our food system. So we didn't really feel like it was fair to be so narrow in our thinking, and but it's partly why it became so broad. I'll leave you with a few thoughts. We hope that this is an interactive resource. I would love to see this actually used and updated and given feedback through its users. There's nothing worse than doing a lot of work to create some kind of database that then falls into obscurity through not being used. And one of the things I think that will make it widely used is that, one, it's demand driven. We were actually asked to undertake this project, and it's important for us in IMMANA. And it can be tailored to many different themes and interests. It can help you dive into a certain topic that you might not know that much about, or it can help you figure out what's already going on in your own field that it might be halfway across the world and you don't know about it. It can be used to prioritize future developments and undertake, for instance, systematic reviews that might not be out there. And also, it'll help us to not reinvent the wheel. If there's something out there that has been invented and exists, we should try to promote those tools and apply them in new ways. So we hope that this will be updated so that it it is a living resource, and it can grow as new tools, metrics, and methods in this space are created, and it will be publicly available, and it can be used specifically by programs, policymakers, and for investment purposes. So I'll just say a very warm thanks to our whole advisory group. I can't list them now, but I got so much support and advice from lots of different people working in this space. I'd like to specifically thank the Campbell Collaboration, who did this project with us, especially Howard White, who was invaluable in his technical expertise in creating this map, and all of his researchers, and the EPI reviewer support team, which is the software people who help us develop this product. And most of all, thanks to the IMMANA program and its funder, DFID. Thank you.
Right. I think there's enough in there to have 2 minutes of questions. What do you think? Because we're running late already, but there's definitely enough. Can you do it? Yeah? Right, questions. Shout them out, quick. Did you have it? No, that was a stretch, right? Anyone's got a question? I've got a question. When can we access the database?
So I'd like to finish the Gray Literature Review, which is underway. So within, I think, about 2 months, this will be, I'm not sure, but I think soon. I think soon, to be fair. And I can provide soft copies to people who need to use them now.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Right, the question there. Go ahead. Oh, there's 2 questions. Quick, let's have them together, and then you can answer them both at the same time.
Yeah, great presentation. Congratulations. That's a lot of work. You know, in a community, sometimes we've tried both things with the knowledge flow that we have, where you let people put things up by themselves. And we ended up having to go back to a moderated system where it goes to somebody who makes sure it goes into the right classification. So are you going to have funds to move forward to moderate, but still permit people to submit, but moderate how it is going to be classified? Because it can be confusing on these sites as to how something's put on.
Absolutely. So I think this is the beauty of this is actually that you can't just upload it yourself, but that you could code it yourself and submit it to IMMANA or whatever hub we create for that. And there is an evidence synthesis component of IMMANA too, which can be working. There will be resources, I think, to add to this map. And now that it's created, it's actually not that much work to put up. I mean, some of the tools that are unpublished, we put into the map early this week. So it's not a laborious process.
Fantastic. And another question.
Thank you. Again, great presentation, a lot of work. I'm curious about definitions and if they're available on the map, methods, metrics, and tools. And then kind of combined with that, as you noted, maybe there are gaps because there's nothing new since 2008. So related to markets and agriculture and food policy, we know that FAO and there are a lot of tools out there that for markets and ag and food policy, which are related to prices and other indicators, plenty of metrics out there. So
Right.
Could you just say a word about that?
Sure. So like I said, this map won't, some of the gaps don't mean that there's nothing out there. It means that we didn't consider them new or innovative since 2008. And we certainly still are in a process of it's quite hard to figure out what is really new. And we're quite happy to adjust that definition slightly. There will be the official Campbell report on this map, which has about 97 reporting requirements and definitions of everything you could imagine, and that will be published. We'll also try to do probably another publication that's more overarching. But I agree with you that there is a lot of work in this space, so it was surprising to me that there wasn't that much, there weren't specific, there were some that jump out, but not as much as I would have expected.
Lovely. All right, I think we better stop there because we're running late. Sorry, Palmani. Lovely. Thank you very much, Thalia. Thank you. Excellent. Well done. Okay, he says properly. The next session this morning is a panel discussion. Yes? So there are going to be some chairs brought on to the... Do you want me to do that? No? And the panel discussion is going to be on lessons learned in food system impact evaluation, and it is going to be chaired by the great... Did you hear that? The great. The great Jeff Leroy. So we are just going to wait a minute for some furniture. And then you're going to introduce your... Yeah.